Over $2,000 to not fix the check engine light on this car behind me. Guys, it's safe to say that I am frustrated with this one. Hey, welcome everyone. So yeah, I'm frustrated, but I'm not really frustrated with myself. I'm not really frustrated with this car behind me. I'm frustrated with the way this customer was handled previously. This car comes into me from another shop. The customer brings it here today for a second opinion because he was told after spending over $500 to fix a P0453 and a P0455, he was told that it needs a PCM and it's going to cost him an additional almost $1,600 to fix this thing. And oh, by the way, guys, I have it diagnosed. I actually have it repaired already. I'm going to take you along in that story. The PCM would not have fixed this car. The customer would have been over $2,000 deep into this thing to still have the exact same problem he came in with. How frustrating is that? Okay? That's why I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated because I don't know the full story. I don't know what happened at the previous shop. All I know is that this customer wasn't taken care of. And it seems like somebody loaded up the parts cannon and just fired it at this car. Because when I talked to the customer, he told me it's already had a vent solenoid, purge solenoid, fuel tank pressure sensor, and gas cap already thrown at this thing with no dice, no repair on here, okay? So I'm gonna take you guys along on my diagnosis and repair of this vehicle. I'm gonna show you what I do. I start off in my whiteboard program. From what I've been told, this does come free with Windows 10, so check it out. It's a really good place to organize all your thoughts down in one place. Today we're working on an 08 Sonata. This thing's got the 2.4 liter under the hood, but this procedure, what we're gonna do today, guys, really would work on just about any basic EVAP system that we're dealing with. About 135,000 miles, 134,784 on here, dealing with those two codes, and I got it on the 26th of October. And with just a quick check into service information, I found no relevant TSBs related. Talked to the customer, got some notes from him. Again, purge and vent have been replaced, new gas cap, CDO receipts, fuel tank has been replaced. So I went ahead and scanned in all of the receipts here, and when the vehicle came into the shop, the previous shop on the 12th of August, the gas tank was removed and the exhaust was removed to diagnose an EVAP leak. Found a broken fuel tank pressure sensor and replaced that. They had to fix and replace the exhaust, and the customer dropped $439 there. Okay, already I'm a little bit frustrated with this because a simple look in service information tells me I don't have to drop the tank to be able to inspect the fuel pump seal, okay? This has a little door, a little window to get through the trunk or through the back seat to be able to access the fuel pump. It took me less than 30 seconds within service information to find that out. So the customer spent $95 to fix exhaust that wouldn't have needed to be fixed if it didn't have to come down to drop the gas tank, okay? Get what I'm saying here, guys? Get why my frustration's already building on this vehicle? Because I diagnosed this thing, I looked at this thing, I figured it out without ever having it on the hoist, guys. This vehicle has not been in the air yet, okay? Look in your service information, especially when we're dealing with fuel pumps, Asian cars especially, guys. A lot of times there's a way to access that through the trunk or through the back seat, okay? So already we've spent a significant amount of labor to throw a a fuel tank pressure sensor at it. Following that, the vehicle initially was in on the 12th. Vehicle went back in on the 18th, so 6 days later. No mileage noted on here at all, but we're back with a 55 and a 53 trouble code in here, okay? The codes point to an issue with a wiring harness. They recommend an hour to check out that harness. Okay, vehicle came back. So that was the 18th. So 3 days later, the vehicle's back. We're dealing 133,943. So we are, what? About 220 miles later. And now we're going to go ahead. The previous shop checked out the harness, smoke tested, manually tested. The diagnostics show there must be an issue with the computer or programming software. We'll advise customer when we're able to do more research. What diagnostics showed them that it was a computer or software issue? So this customer dropped another $100 to have it smoke tested. And don't get me wrong, guys, I am totally fine with charging for diag. 100%. Every shop should be charging for diag because it takes a high level of equipment and a high level of skill. but now the customer spent over $500 and they still don't have this car fixed, okay? It's been in the shop now multiple days, less than 220 miles on it between the two diags. Yeah, so apparently it took a little bit of time, but here is the quote for the PCM. So we're replacing an ECM, PCM, whatever you want to call it, for $1,567. Okay, that came in about a month later to the customer. Okay? Now, what are we looking at? P0455, P0453. P0455 is a simple large leak code, guys, really nothing special here. We have two different cases. The time to generate under pressure takes too long to get to that level, or the time to get to that level takes too long. That's basically all we're looking at is fuel tank pressure sensor is watched by the PCM to verify if we drop below a certain threshold. That's what it's doing for this test. We do have a couple testing conditions there. So really a basic EVAP large leak test, okay? Nothing too crazy there. If you don't know how to test for that, or if you don't know what it is, what a large leak is, make sure to check out our EVAP series. We get into the systems and really talk about all that within there. Okay, then we go over to our P0453. This is a battery voltage high on the fuel tank pressure sensor. See here, threshold value, tank pressure signal above 4.9 volts. The time it takes to verify, half of a second. This only takes the key to be on. Enable conditions, 11 to 16 volts, 2 drive cycles. We're basically looking at short to battery, open, port connection, or faulty fuel tank pressure sensor. I really like that Hyundai shares all of this information with us. It's telling us here that at atmospheric pressure, at 0, we should be reporting 1.5 volts out of our fuel tank pressure sensor. If we bring the tank into a vacuum level, we're looking at high voltage. If we bring it into pressure, we're dealing with low voltage, okay? That's just really nice to be able to have that information right in front of us from Hyundai, so we know it's most likely accurate when we're looking at this problem. So vehicle sitting here, key on, engine off, fuel tank pressure sensor should read 1.5 volts. Go through the Autel scan tool, and there is no fuel tank pressure sensor, PID. So I have no way with the Autel scan tool to look at my live data coming, the signal coming from the fuel tank pressure sensor, unfortunately. It tells me that I'm gonna have to either hook my multimeter or my lab scope into the signal circuit to figure out what my voltage actually is, to figure out if I'm over 4.9 volts. Okay. They share with us a nice little circuit diagram. So we have a reference voltage coming in here, which, judging by the voltage scale that we're dealing with right here, I'm likely looking at about a 5 volt reference. Sensor ground, probably not 0, probably something a little bit higher than that. And then we have a fuel tank pressure sensor signal wire on pin 2. Really nice that they put the signal in the middle. I like that on a 3-pin connector. They share with us a connector view, which is really nice. And then this is where it is within the ECM connector itself. So I did copy and paste a little bit of the diagnostic strategy that they shared with us because there's really relevant information in here to help us understand what this failure is. Ignition off, disconnect fuel tank pressure sensor, measure resistance, blah, 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 blah. Guys, as soon as I see measure resistance, I'm probably gonna bypass that test because resistance is not a good way to check a circuit. I mean, we've been over the resistance tests in the past, but that's not why we're here. We're here because of this right here. So check for signal, or open in signal circuit. So now we're turning the key on. But guys, notice here it never says to reconnect the wire, okay? It never says that. So we're still ignition off, fuel tank pressure sensor disconnected. We're measuring the voltage between terminal 2 of the fuel tank pressure sensor. So we're on the signal wire of the harness side, connector, and chassis ground. Specification on that, 5 volts. So what does that tell us? That tells us that in the event of an open circuit on our signal wire, we would go voltage high. Our P0453 could set due to an open circuit condition at the fuel tank pressure sensor. That is telling me that even though it doesn't show it within this diagram right here, that is telling me that the fuel tank pressure sensor signal right here is actually 5 volts traveling from the PCM to the sensor. The sensor's job is to drop that voltage to ground. It drops it to ground, it lowers that voltage level, and it reports back at 0 pressure. We should be 1.5 volts. If we unplug that connector, if that wire were to break and go open, we would read 5 volts because the PCM is sending out that voltage and looking for it to get to ground, and it's just measuring that voltage drop, okay? So this is a pretty huge find. This right here is telling us that if somebody had disconnected the connector with the key on, this thing would set a P0453. Well, if you're pulling a gas tank out or reinstalling a gas tank, you have to disconnect the fuel tank pressure sensor, right? It just has to happen. You have to disconnect it. If you're replacing a fuel tank pressure sensor, you have to disconnect it, right? If you're maybe doing some testing back there and you maybe bump the connector and it unplugs, for whatever reason, what are the odds of any of those situations happening with the key turned on? Possible, right? I mean, accidentally we leave the key on and stuff all the time, right? It just happens. But any of those situations would have caused an open circuit, would have caused our P0453. So this could be something that may be a problem on the car, or maybe is just something that was fixed by putting the new fuel tank pressure sensor in that previous shop did, and we haven't seen the problem act up since, but somebody unplugged it at one time and never cleared the codes. It's totally possible, right? Could happen. Okay, but now I'm not going to just ignore the P0453. Okay, I've cleared it out. I've checked it again. It does not come back, but still, that's not enough for me. So what I did, got out the voltmeter, got out the lab scope, and I hooked into the back side of the PCM here, back probed into the PCM, and I went into the signal wire, whatever that was, terminal 30. Oops, that's not a highlighter. I went into terminal 33 at the PCM, which is this guy right here. Back probed into that. And I watched my voltage level, key on, engine off, was looking at that 1.5 volts while I manipulated the harness. Shook things around, moved the connector, moved the harness, did the old wiggle test. I did it back by the fuel pump, I did it under the hood, looking for that circuit to go open, because when that circuit goes open, I would read voltage high. No issue found. I cannot duplicate the P0453 at this time. The vehicle's been here now for about a week as I've been waiting for parts and that kind of thing. And I still have yet to be able to duplicate this P0453, which just makes my concern for it drop even lower and lower. But we still have a P0455, a large leak code that we have to diagnose. So that's what I went with next. Now you can take and do a scan tool function EVAP leak test. Start the vehicle, let it idle, make sure it meets all of these parameters here, fuel levels proper, can't have any DTCs stored, and vehicle's got to be warm, that kind of thing. I ran the test initially when I brought the vehicle in. I ran the test numerous times when I was filming it here. I've had it inconclusive, passes and fails. I just can't get a consistent reading out of this test. And that's going to be common when you're using a scan tool test like this, because it's not doing the true in-depth EVAP leakage test that we're going to be doing when we hook up the smoke machine and actually check the system for leaks. It's not doing the system leakage test that it would be doing when the vehicle is operating either. This is just something that makes sure that we're not dealing with a large leak, but at no point here does it actually shut it off and bring that vacuum way low and just let the system sit and see if it decays. It just doesn't do that with this test, okay? So inconclusive results from that, which leads me to actually performing some testing. Okay, so taking a look at this system in general, this is a very basic traditional EVAP system that we're dealing with here, guys. And no, this is not a watering can or anything like that, whatever you guys would call it. It is a fuel tank with a fuel tank pressure sensor on top and a filler neck and gas cap, okay? Not a watering can. But basically, guys, we have the purge solenoid under the hood here hooked up to a hose that runs back to the canister. The vent solenoid here is going to be open atmosphere unless we close it. We have a hose running between the canister and the tank. We have the fuel tank, big plastic tank on here, fuel tank pressure sensor on top, hooked up to our filler neck and gas cap. Okay, nothing special here. To test the system for leaks, the computer would turn on the purge solenoid, apply manifold vacuum to the fuel tank itself. We would close the vent solenoid, draw that system down into vacuum, turn off the purge. So now we have the purge closed, the vent closed, and we would just watch the system. We would watch the fuel tank pressure sensor and look for it to decay, or that pressure to tick up. Our voltage to actually on this fuel tank pressure sensor, we'd be looking for a voltage decrease over a certain amount of time. We have to maintain a threshold, okay? But unfortunately, we can't look at the data for that. So what we're actually going to do is just simply hook the smoke machine up and see what we've got. Go to the scan tool, canister close valve, turn that guy on. So now we are sealed up on the back end. I pulled off the hose off of the purge solenoid, so really I basically disconnected it right here, and then I'm going to hook up my smoke machine. Okay, so we're going to fill smoke, and there we go. We start to fill up the system, and you can see here that the ball starts to drop. We're not at that large leak condition way at the top. We start to bring it down, but it never gets all the way down to zero. That's a problem, right? We have a leak somewhere within this box that I've drawn here, somewhere within this box. So we have a problem: canister, vent, tank, fuel tank pressure sensor, filler neck, gas cap, or the fuel pump seal itself. There is a leak in the system, so that's what I went after next. According to the customer, the previous shop could smell fuel as they walked to the back of the vehicle. If you can smell fuel, that means something isn't happening right with the vehicle, especially when it's pressurized. But they could never find any smoke, right? That's what it said right in the, in the previous repair orders. No leak found. They even dropped the gas tank, no leak found. So I went through the trunk of the vehicle and pulled off the little cover that's sitting over the fuel pump, went back there to inspect, and I could hear it right away. I could hear a hissing sound. I didn't see any smoke, grabbed a flashlight, still didn't see any smoke coming out, but I know I have something leaking back here because I can hear it, and my smoke machine under the hood is telling me I have a leak. So when you can't see the smoke, but you can hear it and you can smell the fuel, grab a bottle of soapy water. Grab something that's going to bubble when you spray it on there. And look at that. We have bubbles coming out by the locking ring of the fuel pump. Guys, there's no way that this happened between the time the vehicle was at this last shop and it got to my shop. This didn't just recently happen. There's something going on here. So we either have a bad fuel tank itself, we have a bad fuel pump, or we have a bad seal between the tank and the pump. Okay, so we have to, get authorization from the customer to dig deeper, right? This is going to cost some money because now we got to pull the fuel pump out and inspect something. If we're pulling the fuel pump out, we have to at least at the bare minimum replace the gasket, right? Because it's not going to seal up again. Okay, so before I call the customer though and say, hey, I got to pull your fuel pump out, even though the last shop said it's completely fine, I have to pull it out and check it because you have a leak there. Before I get to that part, guys, we skipped part of the system, right? We did not check this guy, right? We implemented the smoke machine to test the back half here, right? But we have not tested the purge. The purge has been replaced, right? It's been replaced without a doubt. Customer tells me it was replaced. I don't have any mileage. I don't blah, blah, blah. There's nothing telling me that it's been replaced besides the customer. Take a look at it. It's leaking. Of course it's leaking, right? Kind of makes sense though. If we put the smoke machine on there, you can see we have another small leak. 2 small leaks equal a large leak. Very, very, very possible, okay? Leaking purge solenoid. I don't know how it was overlooked. That seems to be like the most common concern today on EVAP conditions is a leaking purge solenoid for whatever reason. Vacuum pump, smoke machine, just put your finger over it when the vehicle's running and the purge isn't engaged. There's a million ways to test for that leaking purge solenoid itself, but this one's junk. So good thing I checked because, we got to get approval to put a purge solenoid on it as well, or figure out if it's going to be warranted or, whatever the case is. Okay. So, call up the customer, get approval to pull the fuel pump. So here's our fuel pump. Right after I took it out, I was just draining it out. And for those of you that have seen this before or have a really keen eyesight, the fault is displayed right in the first picture and the second picture actually. But as we get closer here and zoom in, and by the way guys, this fuel tank pressure sensor does look brand new. So that's good. I mean, it does have a new sensor on it. So as we scroll here, we're starting to zoom in further on here. Can you see it now? How about now? Look at that. Those are cracks. Those are cracks right in the plastic of the fuel pump itself. And if we look from the inside of the fuel pump there, the cracks go all the way through. Fuel pump's junk, guys. It's cracked. It's leaking. Yeah. Now there's some theory out there, and I would say that that's probably the case here, that when this metal ring here, when this guy gets rusty, it's tethered to the fuel tank with a inlaid metal ring on there. So we lock this into another metal ring. When this guy gets rusty, that rust takes up more room, right? So it actually pushes the fuel pump down, and that's what's causing it to crack. The rust building up on here could be causing our fuel pump to crack. So if you guys are dealing with one of these, if you have a cracked fuel pump, go ahead and spend a little bit of cash that it takes to put this ring on. Just because it comes painted, we're not dealing with another rusty ring, potential repeat failure within a year, you know, whatever the case is. Rust can really cause some issues. We've seen it mess with ABS wheel speed sensors. It appears here that could be the culprit behind why our fuel pump is actually cracking at this, you know, this top surface right here. Okay. Also, when I had that fuel pump pulled out, I looked around the tank, make sure there wasn't a bunch of junk in there, but look what I found sitting at the bottom of the tank. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with what this is just simply the receiving end, the business end of a fuel tank pressure sensor. So this is where the pressure, I guess, would flow into the sensor and be measured. Must have broken off at some point, fell down into the tank. So at some point there was a broken fuel tank pressure sensor on this car. It was replaced, and yeah, the new fuel pump came with a new fuel tank pressure sensor, so I didn't bother taking this one off or anything like that. Now I have a fuel tank pressure sensor that I can keep around to do some validation testing with at some point. And then swap out the purge solenoid and recheck, right? And that's what we gotta do. We can't just release the vehicle at this point. We gotta make sure that the problem's actually fixed. So get the new fuel pump in, new locking ring in, new O-ring in, everything's locked down, everything's looking great. All set to go. Hook the smoke machine back up under the hood. Same place again, we are hooked into and just testing the back half of the system. And look at that, the smoke machine, the little ball in there is consistently dropping, and there we're down at the 0 mark. We've pressurized the system and we have no leaks. Checking the new purge solenoid is always a good idea. New doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, right? So vacuum pump on there, or you can put the smoke machine on it, either way. Holding vacuum beautifully. New purge solenoid, fuel pump, O-ring, and locking ring, and our P0455 looks like it's fixed. Just because I went ahead and ran the scan tool test again, passed with flying colors, no issues, no codes whatsoever. So kind of a lengthy story, a lot going on here, guys. No issue that I've seen so far with a high voltage on the fuel pump's pressure sensor signal wire, okay? Could just be a fluke, could be from somebody unplugging the sensor. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really, really helps us out on YouTube. It makes us look great. If you guys want to get notifications, so every time when we come out with a new video, it lets you know. Go ahead and click that little bell icon there. That way you know what is coming out and what is most recent from us. Guys, I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really had a good time sharing all this information with you, and I hope this helps you guys in the future when you're diagnosing problems on the EVAP system. As always, guys, happy wrenching. Thank you.